Welcome to Bridge City News, Dr. Lewis.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here with you today.
So where did you receive the biggest response when it came to membership sold by your team? Was it here in Western Canada, where you are in Central Canada?
Well, I think it was more based on issues, and so it was more focused on issues that related to freedom and sovereignty and our economy and pro-life issues. So we found that people were gravitating around these issues that they felt that governments weren't dealing with effectively, and so they gravitated to our camp.
Were those a lot of the potential voters more so in Western Canada? Where did you sell more of the memberships, or in Central Canada?
I would say that they were spread out all over the country. And as you know, I did very, very well in Western Canada, but we found that this election cycle, that people were more focused, not really on regional issues per se, but more on issues that pertained to the unity of the country and the prosperity of the nation.
Now, a number of political experts say this race is really Pierre Poilievre's to lose. How do you respond to that?
Well, I think it's the members' race. It's who the members are going to rally behind. And I know that a number of camps have put out their numbers, but really and truly, if everybody who put out their number was accurate, our membership would have to be around 900,000, because we also sold very strong numbers, and our numbers are even stronger than in 2020. I just don't want to weigh into that numbers game, because I don't think it's productive, because it really rests on who the members think will bring this party forward, will unite this party, unite this country, and bring in new conservatives into the fold. And I believe I'm the best person to do that.
Now, you were born in Jamaica, immigrated to Canada at the tender age of 5, and you grew up in East York in Ontario. You have a law degree and PhD in international law, and you're a Bible-believing Christian, correct?
Well, I think, isn't that the only type of Christian that there is? I don't know that a Christian could not believe in the Bible and then consider themselves a Christian. So I would agree with you on that.
So how has your faith really played a role in defining who Dr. Leslyn Lewis really is?
I think that my faith has enabled me to be more compassionate and to recognize that we were all this part of the same family, the human family, and that we, no matter who we are, we deserve to be treated with dignity and respect and love. And so I look at even government policies as making sure that we are there for the most vulnerable, being there for the people who are in need, and making sure that our policies not only uplift our nation and prosper our nation, but that the social fabric of our society is also held together.
Now, how would you really stick up for social conservatives should you become leader?
Well, I think it's important to stick up for all conservatives, for all Canadians. And as I said, I think the social fabric of our nation is very, very important. It's one thing to have a vibrant economic nation, but if we see that parents are losing their rights to raise their children in accordance with their values, if we see that families are being strained, if we see that young people have no desire to, or are just losing hope in being able to even move out of their parents' home and own a home. If we see that families are breaking up, if we see that drug addiction is just rampant within our society, and if we look at the brokenness in our society and we don't find ways to look at or to work together to fixing that, then I don't think that we have a really vibrant, productive society. We need to ensure that the most vulnerable, those who are in need, whether it's a pregnant woman who may decide that she wants to keep her child, she may not want to keep her child, she may want to give it up for adoption, and she needs help getting through that pregnancy, to support pregnancy care centers. So I think that we have to ensure that all aspects of our society are strong.
So if you were to become leader of the Conservative Party of Canada, would you reopen the abortion debate?
I don't believe that debate has ever been closed. I believe in a democracy where we can debate any issues. And I believe in a democracy where not everybody has to agree with me, but I should be free to be able to discuss my perspective without being demonized and without being labeled and without being ostracized. So I think it's very, very important that we move away from this woke cancel culture narrative where we say we're closing off discussions on any topics, because what happens then is you create fringe movements that are outside of society. And we want to be able to bring people into the fold and have conversations about how we progress as a society and as a nation.
So, Dr. Lewis, where do you stand on euthanasia?
I'm very concerned. And years ago, we spoke about the slippery slope, and many people said that we were exaggerating. And now I'm very, very concerned. A few weeks ago, there was a woman, relatively young woman, who was unable to get housing because she had a disability. And she felt that because she couldn't get subsidized housing, that she was going to seek to end her life. And our government, we helped her to do that. And I think that that is wrong, that we could provide an out for a person to end their life, but we can't provide housing. And so this is where we have taken euthanasia and our made legislation to the point where even our most vulnerable are at risk, because now it's potentially going to be extended to individuals such as teenagers who have mental health issues. And those are people that are in need of love and protection. And yet we're saying that what we are willing to do for them is to take their life rather than give them the help and the resources that they need to have a vibrant life.
A number of government restrictions are finally coming to an end. Why do you think it took the Trudeau Liberals so long to act when so many other countries around the world loosened their restrictions months ago?
I think that they got used to being able to rule by decree and mandates, and that somehow they forgot that we have a constitution and a charter of rights, and that some of the things that they were doing were abridging that charter, were infringing upon Canadians' the right to peaceful assembly, the right of the freedom of expression and freedom of mobility. When we can see that a government can invoke a act like the Emergencies Act to freeze people's property during a protest and to confiscate people's property, we know that this is a government that has gone too far, that believes that they have the power to control Canadians and that they are not answerable to Canadians. They forgot that they work for the people. And I think that that was the problem, that they were so entrenched and that they just kept holding on to that power. And finally, they realized that they were on the fringe and that people would no longer tolerate that. And all the other countries had moved along. And I think that they were shamed into making that decision. And I'm glad that they eventually did.
So, Dr. Lewis, as we slowly make our way out of the pandemic, what would you like to see the government do to help our economy get back on track?
Well, I think that we have realized that some of our policies were very short sighted. Right now, we are importing 555,000 barrels of oil a day, largely from dictatorship regimes. Yet we have the third largest accessible oil reserves on the planet. If we had built pipelines to transport our products, through the most environmentally efficient way of doing so is through pipelines rather than through trucks and on trains, we would have been able to get our products to Tidewater, even sell some of our products abroad. In Europe right now, 40% of the oil comes from Russia. And we would have been able to offset that through our liquefied natural gas. We would have been able to sell our products abroad to offset even some of the industries, the countries that rely on coal. And we have been very short-sighted because those revenues could have been repatriated back to our country to invest in our infrastructure and to pay down our debt. Right now, we have a $1.3 trillion debt, which we are spending millions a day just to service that debt. Each Canadian owes $40,000 even before they start school. They owe a $40,000 share of that debt. We need to pay down our debt, and we need to bring our fiscal balance in order to the point where we are no longer relying on deficit spending. And that means investing in our natural resource sector. It means bringing our supply chains home, producing more within our country than we're consuming.
So the Trudeau Liberals have made life very difficult for many here in our energy sector. If you were to become CPC leader and the potentially Prime Minister, what would you do to help more of Alberta's oil and gas get to market? Maybe cancel Bill C-69?
Yes, absolutely. That would need to be canceled along with the recent C-48, because we cannot have a nation, the nation with the third largest accessible oil reserves on the planet, that has legislation that favors foreign oil production over local oil production. We need to ensure that we can develop our natural resources. It not only benefits Canada as a whole, we have First Nations communities that are engaged in resource sharing agreements with our government that will enrich those reserves, that will take those reserves out of poverty and create wealth within those reserves. Many of those First Nations communities have said that they don't want a handout. They want to be able to enrich their own communities and to develop infrastructure on their communities. And Canadians also want that too. We want to be able to uplift ourselves and rebound out of COVID. And one way of doing that is to start developing our natural resources, because for every resource job that's created, there are 7 splinter jobs created all around the country, whether they're in the steel industry, whether they're in the banking industry, in the transportation industry, in the resource development industry. These industries all benefit from our oil and gas sector.
Now, here in southwestern Alberta, we rely heavily on the agriculture sector. What help would you like to see for our farmers and ranchers, who many would argue are the bread and butter to our economy?
I think it's very important that we recognize that our policies do directly affect the food that gets on our table. And when we have farmers who ordered fertilizer from last year and had their fixed budget for this year based upon those fertilizer costs, and our government imposed a 35% tariffs on the fertilizer that was ordered from last year, it really offsets, the balance and the budget that they have set to produce the crops for this year is completely off. And they're going to pass those costs on to consumers. So we need to recognize that our policies do have an impact on the cost of food that gets on our table. We also need to invest in those industries and make sure that even our environmental policies, that they're not negatively impacting on those industries. For example, in the agricultural sector, they have to pay carbon tax to dry their crops, but yet they don't get credit for carbon sequestration that they produced while producing their crops. So we need to ensure that our policies, especially in the area of the environment, also recognize the contributions of our agricultural sector.
Many Albertans are simply frustrated with Ottawa and the federal Liberals, and there's more and more talk of separation's been growing here in the West. How would you approach the Alberta separatists? A number of Albertans feel quite isolated from Ottawa.
Well, I would let them know that we want to work with them and that we have a mutual goal of keeping this country together, uniting this country, and making sure that every region's voice is heard. We understand that the West has unique issues that are pertinent to them. And I recognize that our centralized government has taken the West for granted. I recognize in issues and in regulations like Bill C-48 and Bill C-69 that those regulations penalize the West and actually put handcuffs on them to develop their natural resources. And so I would work together with the separatists and make sure that we have policies that will ensure that the West thrives, because when the West thrives, so does the rest of Canada.
Amen to that. Dr. Leslyn Lewis, CPC leadership candidate, thanks so much for joining us today from Ontario.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.